Ah, there goes my intro. My goodness. I guess we.
Mi gente, you already know who it is. It's Danny Limelight. And I need all of you to subscribe to According to Wiz podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and all other platforms.
What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to my friend. He's a comedian. He's a combat sports boxing aficionado and commentator. He's the one and only Chris Strait. Chris, what's going on, my man?
Oh, not much, man. Just hunkering down the way we all are right now.
Yeah, man. It's and we were kind of talking a little bit off air, but like it's. I mean, it's been a interesting year, and to say the very least.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like I said, it's ended with a nice. Well, I mean, this is strictly the opinion of an LA native who leans very slightly liberal, but it's been a nice 3 for 3 at the end of the year to what was a really awful year up until Lakers, Dodgers, Biden. It's been a nice, blue wave in a couple of ways. So.
Yeah, well, and it's weird, right? Because like at least in my kind of existence, I don't think I mean obviously, civil rights was before my time, Jim Crow was before
Yeah.
the plague, the Great Depression, that was all in generations before us, right? So, but on paper, like I have never seen, I mean, on both sides, right, where everybody was just kind of ticked off, either directional or directionless,
Yeah.
in many ways, and it was on both sides. We saw hypocrisy on both sides of the fence. We saw a galvanization of, I don't know. I guess in some ways, like party lines can be just a political, but like, no, man, if you're in a party, you're not going to go to a party that you don't feel like you're welcome or invited to, right? So like people kind of were
That's the
galvanized.
Yeah, no, as the people were sort of, it's always a joke, like the defense attorney and the prosecutor will go at each other in the court and you'll see them having lunch together afterwards. Like they understand they compartmentalize, or, you hear about senators and congressmen that are, hardline right wing and a hardline left wing that are actually very good friends personally. That's sort of, maybe that's still going on there, but the division that they've created is so bad. It's like, the only good thing about it is if 145 million people vote, which is like double the way it's been in some elections, even with modern population numbers, it got us all out to vote, but it's for a terrible reason. Everybody's so polarized now that you're right. We're getting an abridged version of all that stuff, like the Spanish flu, the civil rights movement, the '60s protests against the war. We're getting like an abridged version of all of it in 1 year, which is a lot for a lot of people to handle. I mean, and I've had, obviously, I mean, my wife was sort of clarified as disabled. She's got an autoimmune disorder. She's a military veteran. She got like kicked off of her benefits. We've haven't tried to get those back. I just got to where I could finally, after 20 years in comedy and doing TV and everything like that, I finally got to where I had a gig that was paying me enough to where I could just be a comic. I mean, I take on other work if I get it, but I had just gotten there on the cruise ships. And then, of course, they all shut down. Then I had a bad car accident, actually, mutual friend of ours, boxing promoter Steve Bash, is my lawyer for that case. He's doing a great job. I got T-boned at an intersection. Thankfully, I was okay, not even a scratch. But if my kids had been in the car with me, I mean, I don't even want to think about what happened there. But it's been, my dad's battling health issues, so it's been one heck of a year. That's why I said I try to focus on the 3 recent victories because time is cyclical. The numbers we put on it don't make a lot of difference, but yeah, I mean, you'd hope that good things will come of this. But after all the unrest in the '60s, it really, it didn't happen immediately. I mean, it was the late '70s, early '80s before we really felt like there was a huge national pride again. And I'd say the Olympics helped with that more than anything that was happening politically.
Yeah, and it moves in waves. But I mean, my goodness, it seems like that was like, I mean, it was like limited tickets, car accident. Your wife has ongoing issues, stuff with your dad. That's crazy. And funny enough, I too, along with I guess our mutual friend, like Bulletproof Troop, we basically got in a car crash where Steve Bash represented us, and.
Yeah.
Shout out to Steve Bash and Bash Boxing and Lights Out Extreme Fighting. One of the true like good guys in this, and that whole team is amazing. But I mean, it's thankfully I was able to kind of weather this kind of pandemic and made a couple investments and stuff like that. But these are things that I wouldn't have thought about before pre-March, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's thankfully, like I said, they switched the unemployment rules, so I was able to collect. They switched the loan rules, and I've had to play some creative financing and things like that. And I've taken advantage of the time. I didn't like being away from my kids for half the year, practically. And I have two older kids with my first wife, and the two that I have my current wife. We live 7 minutes apart. I see them, almost every day, and so that part has been good to connect with family. But obviously, for the first couple of months of the pandemic, we couldn't even do that. Like if you lived in a different house, we were supposed to, in all honesty, I was breaking that for the kids. But no, there was a while there where, they weren't seeing their grandkids and I wasn't seeing them. And, so it's like, it makes you feel, it makes you appreciate something that maybe you weren't appreciating when it comes back together. And I'm definitely relishing every little victory as if it was a huge one in my life right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jesse Velasquez, who's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and a IFS International Fight Showdown champion, he says, "Yeah, big facts. 2020 started out horribly, but it looks like it's ending well. Hopefully,
Yeah,
right?
no,
I
and
mean,
I know
that's
that two of the three victories, I don't mean anything if you're not from SoCal or not a Dodgers or wrestling, but it was a nice build up. I said that it would be nice if LA did a triple, but we all know the Rams aren't going to make that one this year, probably not yet. So no, but I mean that the nice triple is with the election, and just to see other countries finally kind of looking upon us with any type of favor is kind of interesting. As somebody that was traveling for a living, that does matter. You travel internationally, you become the suggestion box for America. And when 12% of us, only 12% of us, according to the numbers I saw, even have passports, that's pretty tragic, as far as being an island unto ourselves, because they're looking at us, whether we're looking at them or not. And that's something to keep in perspective.
No, absolutely. And perspective is everything. And it's funny because I can't remember. I want to say it was maybe like Vox or something like that on YouTube, VOX, right? Where they
Yeah.
basically did like a 6 minute piece of like people in other countries reacting to like what they were seeing in terms of the election. And they're like, wait, what do you mean? Like you're waiting in lines? What do you mean? Like not everybody's registered to vote, not everybody votes. These are things that are foreign to them, because I mean there was a gentleman in Germany that was just like, yeah, it takes me like 5 to 7 minutes in and out, like literally from the time I'm out of my car,
or
and then
the
get
immigrant
in and back.
process. I had a buddy that moved to Australia, and literally he stuck his driver's license into a machine and they spit out an Australian driver's license to him. It's like they just wanted to check his record. He married an Australian girl. Citizenship is just fast tracked, and that's a country that a lot of people are trying to get into. It's not as if they're begging for immigrants, and but it's funny to sort of see that during the last 4 years that we've become the country that has to have our borders closed, or that people were they won't let us out, not letting people in. That was scary, but it was humbling, because when I was a kid, nobody looked down on America. When I was a kid, they might have hated us, but we were something to aspire to. You see these videos like if you watch Norwegians on
I made a note of the people they were
other
talking
countries
about,
that
and then I
have
put a
very functional
personality,
democratic
like
socialism,
for instance,
looking down
Adrian
at us
reminds
the
me
way
of
that we would look down on
Marsha
a third
Brady,
world nation. It's kind of a reminder. It's a time to self-check, rather than just get angry. It's like, what, they're probably right about this.
but also the King of Hearts because
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, it's just weird because we've never really had this kind of polarization in I want to say what, like 3, 4, 5, 6 decades. And it's just like, and this is, it isn't look at that kind of time frame, right? Look at how many presidents on both sides of the aisle that we've had, right? And then like for whatever reason, like
1970. Yeah, 70,
1970.
71 to answer your question. But I mean, before my time, even, and it's sort of before yours, but it's like you watch these documentaries if you're a fighting sport guy on Ali Frazier. And you got Brian Gumbel saying things like, people forget how deep the divisions in America were at the time. There was rioting in the streets over no particular thing that had happened. It was just, and police, hard hats beating up long hairs was the term they used in there. in those times. But yeah, Frazier sort of accidentally becoming a representation of the right wing, and Ali, of course,
so I'll remember.
playfully embracing the left wing. And it was, but yeah, the divisions were that tight. And during that time, we actually, you know, it seemed like all the liberal or you know, forces were getting assassinated. You know, people like King and Kennedy and all that, and then Nixon takes the White House. You started to feel like, you know, like the good guys were losing if you were on that side. That's why there was sort of this feeling of loss throughout the early 70s. It was like, you know, okay, I guess we got to just put up with this nonsense till they all get old and die. Whereas here, it's like, I feel like it's not taking as long. But by getting it all done at once, the pandemic, the war, the everything, the social unrest, you really feel like things can change a lot faster. There's a feeling of optimism to the point where we're putting up the worst COVID numbers in the world, and yet, you know, the stock market is soaring upon announcement that a vaccine is even close. You know, people are jogging in my park without masks on, which I don't necessarily recommend. But we're just so sick of feeling lost that we're just spinning everything into a victory.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you were talking about the stock market. Like, I actually invested for the first time, like, you know, in the last couple months, and I actually invested in a foreign company. Like, I went all in, like, you know, being a combat sports fan or even a pro wrestling fan. I was just like, somebody said like, oh, you should buy stock or jump into Robinhood and what have you. And I was like, yeah, cool. I'm going to be, a shareholder of the WWE, so I can tell Vince McMahon what's what and what I think about his crummy programming and whatever. And then I was just like, you know what, that's not gonna work. Let's figure out a way where I will profit from, you know, a good decision, right? So I went like all in. I thought like a stockbroker. I'll have a little bit of this, I'll have a little bit of that, and whatever. And then I saw something and I jumped in. And I mean, total disclosure, right? And so NIO, NIO, is China's like chief competitor to Tesla, and they're doing really well. And I got in about like $13, right? And I bought like close to 100 shares and kind of buying in. I bought a share, but right now it's trading at like $44. So
that's the thing. Yeah. Those people that told those stories 22 years ago, I actually worked in a financial firm. I just had no money to do anything about it. But I came in a little bit late. Like when you hear about those IPOs like Linux and Red Hat, when the tech boom was just starting, and like people would put in 10 grand and end up millionaires because of how many times it split. And back then, though, what you're saying is true. Like a diversified portfolio, at least from the nation standpoint, was if you had 10 to 15% in international stocks. You know, you're pretty much expected to have virtually everything in domestic stocks. You know, now this isn't true of everybody. Correct me if you're watching this and it's not. But I mean, I've heard of like if it's not 50-50 international national, you're viewed as like almost a country bumpkin that doesn't know there's life outside this border. That, and because the last few bad economies haven't been bad for everyone. Like, you know, we're booming when they're busting, we're busting when they're booming. And especially if you're doing any type of income investment where you're retired and need dividends on it now, you know, it's like you can't afford to have stocks, period. But nowadays that's not viable because the days of a 5% bond portfolio are over. You know, you can't retire on $1 million, you know, both because cost of living's gone way up and because what you used to make 5, 6, 7% on 20 years ago, 10% on 40 years ago. Now you're lucky to get 2%. I mean, money markets and savings accounts where you make nothing, zero. I mean, it's like they're holding your money for the privilege of holding it. You get nothing. So yeah, you have to take some kind of risk, and it's viewed where like, hey, being in another country when this one goes kaput is kind of the plan of a lot of investors in sports.
Now, and it might not be patriotic is a weird one, right? Like, you know, obviously it's cool to have nationalistic pride, regardless of whatever country you're born into or immigrated to, and subscribe to their belief system and way of life, right? But like, we are citizens of the world, right? I mean, theoretically speaking, that's what we kind of need to, like, yes, it's good to love your country and it's it, but like to straight out think like just because it's your country and to kind of negate the fact that like, oh, other places are doing it better, right? Like, you know, it's like to be a true citizen.
Yeah, no, I was by growing up a comedy fan before I became a comic. Like, I mean, my parents exposed me to the Mel Brooks humor before I was even old enough to understand half the jokes. So I understood that, you know, if I really want to laugh, I better get smarter.
Everybody
And,
should
you
be
know, the
able to
comics
take
they
their
were the
stress.
only cool kids
That's
that I could do what they were doing. You know, like I loved the athletes, I loved the boxers, and I was better at boxing than most other sports. But still, I could never do what those people did. The rock stars, I got 3 left hands when I try to play an instrument. I have no singing ability. Yeah. No singing ability whatsoever. So the only cool kids that I could like do something that like, I could do this were the comedians. You know, they were telling it like it was. I could do that. They'd make it funny. I could do that. You know, but I still didn't get on stage for another like dozen years after I knew I wanted to do it because I was a kid. I didn't know you could, and so I was 24 in grad school for psychology, and I finally said, you know what, I got to go do this. So I tried it, and I never looked back. For 20 years, I've been doing it. But it's a very, very tough business. So you sort of get a crash course in other things, but you get to travel for your work, which exposes you to a lot of other people. And it's just that seeking out of knowledge makes you not only more wizened to the world, but it does make you, whether you want to admit it or not, judge those that don't seek that out. You know, there's people that have never left their town, let alone state, let alone country. It's like, how can you say half the things you say when you have zero knowledge of how it is, you know? And now with YouTube, my kids are growing up in a world where they want to learn something about a country. They type in things on Wikipedia and they've read 10 pages. They type in something on YouTube and they've basically gone there with a torch. You know, I had to wait at Inglewood Public Library to get out of there before the gunshot started. I want to read about all that stuff when I was a little kid. So it's just become a world where Americans literally have to make more effort to be ignorant than they do to be wizened. And so that's also created a divide as well. Those that want to have the world pulled over their eyes have to create a social life, a social media life. They really have to stay in a cocoon where they are never exposed to anything else. You know, otherwise, you know, otherwise that system that they're under will collapse.
Yeah, and it's again, you know, I always try to do this. I challenge myself to do it because, like, my timeline, right, my YouTube digest, as they say, right, it's skewed towards the things that I like, obviously, you know. So you're gonna get like WWE stuff. You're gonna get, you know, New Japan. You're gonna get MMA. You're gonna get boxing. You're gonna get all of it. You know, and then even some of like my political stances, those are going to show up too. But I always try to, you know, if I watch, you know, 2, you know, 6-minute videos that I like agree with and suit my taste a little bit better, I try to go like a 10 to 15-minute video of something that I don't necessarily, just to kind of get a sense of where people are coming from, right? And it humbles you because, like, you know, regardless of how this kind of thing, you know, happened in the election, there are people that are legitimately going to be mourning, right? This is a mourning, it's a death in many aspects of it. So you have to respect that, you know, and that I didn't see. I'm starting to see a little bit more, but like, again, the empathy for each other should be, I think it should be a little bit more pronounced.
Yeah, and it is going, you have to see, like, there's certain things that I don't bother exposing myself to because it makes me angry because I've already exposed myself to it. Like, for example, as a fight fan, I've hated Donald Trump since I was 12. If you don't remember, before the Tyson Spinks fight, he's standing in the ring next to Muhammad Ali. Ali gets introduced. The crowd is standing and clapping because remember, Ali was already in bad shape by that point. He wasn't getting out publicly as often. And then afterwards, Trump has himself announced. And I remember just being 12 years old thinking, that dude is dangerous. I remember thinking, that dude's ego is out of control. I go, Conrad Hilton might be a shit hook too, but at least he keeps his ass out of the ring when you have a fight at the casino. You know, and so it's like, right away, I knew something's wrong with that dude. And of course, so I really can't have a lot of respect with people that trust he's going to do something, but I do know where they're coming from. They're coming from the attitude they think, okay, it's all corrupt, so I'm going to go with the guy who's most corrupt because he can't lie and I'll catch him. You know, or yeah, he'll fight the other corrupt people for me. It's like, I need a sword to fight the sword people. That's where they're coming from. And I get that mentality, But in my mind, I always try to tell them, look, number one, you don't get to erase the fact that Donald Trump was famous for being a piece of garbage for 35 years before we elected him. We all hated him together and laughed in his face together. He was just entertaining, so we let him be famous. Nobody really admired him. Nobody with intelligence admired him. He was a spoiled rich kid that got handed a check and was the greatest ever at keeping his name in the paper, but failed at everything else. So you don't get to erase that history. The other thing to tell them is that if you had a broken window, which is a bad analogy for how corrupt the government is, but follow me here. If you had a broken window, you would burn down the house. You'd fix the window. And Donald Trump was burning down the house. Whereas Joe Biden, he may not repaint the house and make it nice. That was burning, but he'll fix that damn window. And that's kind of what we need. And he's saying all the right things that are going to make the progressives happy, and at least make the conservatives less angry, like to bridge the gap to this and that. Because it's the theory of nonviolence, Gandhi and Dr. King. When you make yourself peaceful, you automatically make even the slightest aggression from your opponent look evil. And that's kind of what is going on here. Is that Trump Trump is a narcissist and a sociopath, so he cannot control this coming out of his mouth. He knows it's not right to be fighting this right now. He's killing his chances of running again in 4 years. He's killing his party's chances. He's embarrassing his family. He knows he's not going to win these cases. He knows he's wasting more taxpayer money. But he doesn't care about any of that. It's a compulsion. He has to get this stuff out. And look, I paid for that master's degree in psychology. I'm going to use it. So, but it's true. He can't control it. It's coming out. But so he's going to do what he's going to do. So Biden, knowing that, is just sitting back and sort of letting him hang himself with his own news, doing subtle go fuck yourselves to Donald Trump, which is hiring the people he fired. That's a very mistake. You got rid of this guy, so he must be awesome. I'm going to read.
No, and it's funny too because I'm surprised because I think bringing it back to comedy, right? I think that's like the clearest sense of like what we were kind of in for was Joey Coco Diaz on Rogan, right? Like he basically kind of. He was just like he was a kid in New York, New Jersey area, and he saw the stuff and saw, how the Trump International Organization basically would, put in large orders for, family, 3 generations deep masonry company or timber mills or whatever, and not pay the bill. They'd go out of business.
He intentionally bankrupted companies when it was time to pay the workers all the time. He's known for that more than anything. The man and he was a slumlord before that. The man has literally made his living his entire life, making the poor poorer and the rich richer. And if he had any shot at having any respect for the middle class, the fact that they would vote in their own demise is guaranteed. He thinks they're stupid. But he plays the game that narcissists play. Anything you accuse him of, he just automatically accuses you back. And so his followers will be like, no, you're the one that's brainwashed. I'm like, did you just hit me with the political equivalent of I know you are, but what am I? Like zero evidence, I'm just going to be louder because he learned the lesson. And Mary Trump talked about it in her interview. She goes, he learned the lesson very early from Fred Trump, who was the consummate narcissist and sociopath, an evil man. That, his older brother, his beloved older brother, was a decent human being, and his father hated him for it. Because so narcissists hate decent people because they don't fall for their crap and they're not impressed by them. Intelligent people are very intimidating to Donald Trump because he's not smart. He can only really win by being a bully. Not that you can't bully some smart people, but there's a clock ticking on. Every time he fired somebody, it's because they finally caught on to him and he's got to move on to a new. It's why guys like that have many wives. There are many relationships. I've known women like this. I've dated a couple that had milder versions of it. Everybody thinks sociopathic narcissists are like, we think of them as murderers. I go, no, that just means you don't have empathy. I mean, no one, actually, most people who don't care about anybody but themselves are not going to commit any murders because they're afraid of themselves going to jail. So it's still, it keeps them, they have to do it in subtle ways. My ex-sister-in-law has this, many people have. But you can take advantage and play that to sort of, to your advantage if you know how to go against these people. And I think Biden is doing a very good job of that. He's not mentioning that we all know there's not going to be a concession speech. There's not going to be, he won't show up at the inauguration. I guarantee you Trump won't. And that's just because of they have to, and Hillary warned us of it 4 years ago. He cannot accept losing because it would throw his whole house of cards. It would just knock it down. Everything that he loses has to be corrupt. I mean, he was literally calling for the count to continue where he was losing and to stop where he was winning. I mean, he's not even hiding that he does not care about democracy and is a fascist. So it's hard for me to respect that, getting back to the original point, but I still try to see where it came from so we can avoid it happening again. Because, Biden talk about bringing everybody together and forgiveness. I'm like, I'm not sure. I'd make some of them hurt a little bit because we don't want this to happen again in 4 years. And if we just go like, oh, okay, forgiveness. No, I think some people need to be, I think some of his most ardent supporters need to hurt from this so that they learn a lesson not to do it again.
Yeah, but the disciplinarian thing, especially the phrase of like, not my president, right? And so we saw that during the Obama years. Like, I was actually living, my wife was from Bakersfield. We were living in Bakersfield, the first time, and anybody that thought like, especially being in the greater Los Angeles area, Los Angeles County, you kind of you're kind of sequestered, right, into kind of a particular mindset, right? But you get to San Bernardino, you get to Orange County, you get to like anything 5 North, and you're like, oh wait, anything that isn't like San Francisco and LA, everything in between tends to bleed a different way, right? So it's just funny, and Jesse's saying that Trump was really good for comedy and memes at the very least, 100%. And then he's learning a lot of psychology here. So I'm just saying, Jesse, there you go.
No, but Patton Oswalt did say, he said it during the Bush years, but they applied during the Trump years. He goes, people go, oh, you're going to miss Bush because he was so good for comedy. He goes, I would happily give back the 10 minutes I wrote on Bush if we weren't torturing people and our money wasn't on fire, which is the situation that Obama took over during. But the one change I really want to see come out of this is that I want Biden to make, or it won't be Biden by himself, Senate and House will have to pass it, but I want all these assumed things that weren't in law put into law. Like, you must concede when you lose. You must attend this and that. You must peaceful transition out. You must appoint no one in your family to these positions. I'm including Kennedy. Liberals have done it too. But no one in your family gets appointed to any position. It's the appearance of impropriety. If your cousin is the best person for the job, then let's go with the second best person for the job. Your family should not be in those jobs the way Trump did it. You must, it is a law, you must release your tax returns. Let's change that, because Trump does not do something because it's always been done. Trump doesn't do something because it's the right thing to do. He asks one question: can I get away with it legally?
Yeah.
So this is a lesson. Let's put all these things into law. That way it's not a problem.
Well, one thing that is law that he could actually, and it's funny because like to say that he was a great opposer of President Obama, and I like using the whole "not my president" kind of argument. I don't personally like, because like they are right, that is the fact, right? So I've never said, like, I've always tried consciously, President Trump, President Obama, like that, because when you're saying stuff like that, like, what, to me, I'm like, what are you really saying? Like, is it like, oh, this kind of augmented way of looking at things and governing things was awesome in like 1776, 13 colonies, but like if you brought one of the forefathers, say 2020 or 2015 even, right? They look around and like basically think you're a dang wizard, like we're carrying devices in our pocket that has, you can't suppress knowledge, right? So it's so what are you saying? Like, should we not have just like one person or 3 governing bodies or just 2 political parties to kind of do the biting for the people? Like what are we really
our
saying?
System is definitely, I mean, Trump highlighted it in the wrong way by having it explode. But he didn't end up draining a swamp. Like, he was the swamp basically. But the trouble is, and people now have appreciation for what government was before. If he wanted everyone to hate it, he's actually making them love it now, which I don't think is a service. But this attitude that it needs to be that way because it always was that way. There was a meme going around that said, like, one of the founding fathers talking to an assistant, And he's saying there must always be an electoral college. He goes, yeah, but what if California has 40 million people? And then the guy spits out the tea that was prepared by a slave and says, there's how many people in the where? Because there was no California. There were 13 colonies that were all roughly the same size. And the electoral college is the dumbest thing in the world. Donald Trump has lost 2 elections by nearly 8 million people combined. And yet he gets to call himself former president. 8 million people. That's New York City's population, our biggest city. That's the difference of people that wanted the other person running to win. The idea that, I mean, they don't make the whole county vote with the majority. They don't make the whole city vote with the majority. They don't make the whole region, just states. State lines should not matter if it's a federal matter. If we're voting on something that affects every man, woman, and child individually, then it doesn't matter if we all live in the same county in Kansas, or we're all spread out, or we're in Alaska, Miami, New York, and nothing in the middle. Where we live is irrelevant. One person, one vote. I don't believe in a Senate either. 500,000 people in Wyoming, they get 2. 40 million people in California, we get 2. It's the textbook definition of insanity. It's completely unfair. As far as I'm concerned, I like the 3 branches. I do. But 9 Supreme Court justices for life? No. 21 Supreme Court justices, and you need to keep earning your job. House of Representatives, only. No Senate. And it can go by region because you have regional concerns you need to be brought federally. But every million people gets a representative. That's about 330 people, similar thing. And every 2 years, we can sort of reevaluate because people move and go in and out of whatever. But every million people or whatever, you want 660 reps, make it every 500,000 people if there's 330 million people in the U.S. And I believe in an executive branch, but I don't believe in a vice president. I mean, first of all, think about this. The vice president's 2 jobs are to confirm the electoral college. Well, under my system, there is no electoral college. Or to make ties in the Senate. I don't believe in a Senate. Or to ascend to the presidency if the president dies or resigns. What kind of monarchistic crap is this? As any Californian will tell you, or Georgian now, you can have a special recall election. Presidents don't die in office anymore. But if somebody did or resigned, then you do a special recall election, pick somebody new. We shouldn't have to put up with the second in command because somebody, and I know these things are not likely to change, maybe the electoral college, but the idea that something needs to be in place because it was there 200 years ago is ridiculous, because nothing is the same from 200 years ago. Half of the population was enslaved 200 years.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's not even theoretical speaking. It is absolute fact. And, it's funny because, essentially there's a secession plan where, I mean, because our, state, what was she? She was Kamala Harris's what position? She had a state position, right?
She was a senator from California. Yes,
right. So basically, the governor, who has been, under flack for so many things, that has kept his private winery open while other businesses closed, and it's not fun stuff, right? Or even took some of the PPE loans, and denied it for other people.
Busted for that.
Yeah. So, but he is going to be tasked by replacing the now vice president. So it's just, yeah, man, everything is like all up in the air. It's almost like a reshuffling of everything. And the one thing that I do.
Yeah, I don't believe in appointments either. Like the Supreme Court justice in Switzerland, they don't do that. You want a new stop sign there? People vote on it. It's like I think put them on the ballots. I mean, we vote every 2 years anyway, and so I just think that people need to be voting on more. We don't need this representative government nearly as much as we did 200 years ago. We don't, we're not so busy working 20-hour days in the fields that we can't vote on whatever. And yeah, if your states want to vote on things in the state legislature, yeah, I'm not saying everything needs to be national. I mean, if there's a river in Wyoming they got to build a dam for, the Ohio voters shouldn't have that on their ballot. But for anything federal, it should, one person, one vote. I don't think things need to be voted on representative-wise unless it's like a major issue that is strictly affecting all of us equally, better, like who the president is.
No,
Abortion.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny because as Jesse kind of alluded to, right? At the very least, the amount of memes and comedy, they were at an apex, especially I mean in this last year, even though people were at home. And I looked at this kind of time as somebody that had, his kind of like cut my teeth in radio, I mean, it seems like forever ago, but back in 2003, right? And basically, this is the first time in history where somebody that, is just doing something out of their house is on par with any national or international kind of news, whether it be correspondent or source or anything. Like everybody's at the same level. Everybody's using, whether it be this or Skype and everything like that. Like, like we're all on the same level. You could walk into any Best Buy and literally walk out with, I mean, a couple $100 worth of equipment, and you're on, like, you have the ability to basically broadcast whatever
Reach
you
out to
like.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at who has the YouTube followers, it's very random what goes viral and gives you a following. I have a friend of mine that is a professional YouTuber making probably close to $500,000 a year, making videos, and he does research on them and he travels, and he's older than me. So I mean, he's handling it the right way, and he deals very well with his following. But it is random, and there's good and bad to that. It takes the power away from a few elitists deciding everything, which is nice. Not as much as people might think, though. There's still people like Zuckerberg pulling the strings and deciding what makes it and what doesn't. I always tell people that when I read that 29% of unarmed people killed by police are African American, it put two thoughts in my head, one left wing, one right wing at the exact same time. My first thought was, that is 2.5 times the black population. That is terrible. There's some type of systemic racism there, even if not literal, definitely in them being in the neighborhoods where police feel like they got to draw down the second they get there. And my next thought was, where's the videos of the other 71%? So those are getting filmed. Those are getting sent in. Those are not going viral. Who's deciding that? Somewhere along the line, they decided that white on black racism is the only one selling ad space on the news, and they're taking that and running with it. So first of all, there is a bit of an illusion, the way George Carlin would say it, the illusion of control, the illusion of power is there. But in a way, it's very real. I have a lot of friends who have made their own way, and what they look like and who they are and where they live. They would have never been passed by the entertainment elite. They would have never been passed. They got to do it on their own, which is very good. The downside of everyone thinking they have a voice is you get these chat rooms and you got a 14-year-old arguing with a neurosurgeon about brain health, and if he is just better with words, people are listening to him. And that lack of humility is sort of like, you just want to say to a whole younger generation, I'm glad you have this power, but mind your bitch ass mouth. Right? You don't know a lot yet. And that humility from being wrong isn't there, because this world of lies being called alternative facts, if people don't like what you say, it doesn't matter how true it is, they just throw it out. I mean, there's zero evidence of voter fraud. In fact, the only voting fraud is the systemic fraud that has kept the mail-in ballots such a secret for all these years. I mean, look at who was voting that way. It was all cities. The cities all went blue. The rural areas all went red. And now we know, it's like, wow, the country has not been electing who the majority of people have wanted. The people that don't get to vote because they're working a double shift or that line is wrapped around the block, that's not living in a retirement community or a rural area. Those are city people. So we've been letting retirees and rural folks decide our elections for far too long. And I think Trump saw that coming. He knew that he wouldn't win if people could mail in. And he's throwing an absolute fit right now because he's the first Republican president who's going to lose out because of that. But how many others should have? I mean, Reagan definitely legitimately won, but how many other elections? I mean, would Bush, Gore have even been close if mail-in ballots weren't thought of back then as strictly a military thing? I mean, that's who everybody thought voted by mail. Did you even know you could do that if you were in your house? I didn't know it was an option if you were living in the state, So, yeah.
Well, my wife is kind of leery on the whole thing, and it's funny because, like, I'm, half ADOS, American descendant of slaves on my dad's side, and then my mom is a Fijian immigrant, right? And once she just had a resident alien card, even though she was married to, and that's kind of the craziness, right? Like the illusion that there's a pathway to citizenship. And, even the current president now said, my grandparents migrated from Germany, they would be kind of aghast at everything that's going on, the immigration policy. And you just implied what we all kind of thought, and what we're all kind of on the lower rung of yourself are basically saying. But it's just like the hypocrisy. But my mom, every year, she would take a gig, not just because of financials, but also because she wanted to be a part of the process, that she was a pollster. like almost and worked before she went on her self-imposed retirement. She was one of the secretaries to the mayor of Inglewood, and the reason why she had to go on a self-imposed retirement was because despite living here for 30 some odd years and having two American born children and being married, well, formerly married to a United States, Army veteran, she also um, couldn't get her citizenship. And again, she worked in city government, and that green light didn't happen. She didn't get passed, as you were saying. And yeah, and uh, I mean, my mom died as a legal immigrant, and that's facts, So it's just, I could see both sides of it. But and that's the thing. But without that perspective, like it gets lost, right? You get lost in a narrative, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you guys as comics probably had some of the greatest material kind of span from this time. So at the very least, right? And the same thing, like I remember, George Carlin. I love that you brought him up
Yeah.
because he's one of my favorites of all time. But he, his special after 9/11 in New York, I think that
Yeah.
is like I mean, that is the Michelangelo painting, so to speak. Like that is the culmination of like what 50 years in TV and comedy and
At
everything
that
like
point,
that.
yeah,
And
something like
this,
that. 45 years at that point. Yeah, yeah. But the first special of his I ever saw was Jamming in New York. I was 16. It was 1992, and Sam Kinison had just died. The LA riots had just happened. I got hit with my first of what would be decades of like occasional panic attacks. So like I was reeling, and he just really later on that became ranked his best special, but. He just really laid into war culture at a time when we were all so gung ho about the Gulf War. He split it in half. And he just dissected it all. And he goes, "It's just a big prick waving dick fight. It's just a big manhood problem. All the bombs, rockets, and bullets are all shaped like dicks." And he stripped them all down to like these 13-year-olds having a pissing contest. And it spoke to me. I go, this guy, he's telling the absolute truth. And people are laughing at things they would normally be scared of. And it was at that point that I really realized the power of comedy. I knew that, like, in retrospect, I've always known, but I didn't really accept it until a couple of years ago. But this is something my brain does that can make money. I tried teaching. I tried behavior therapy. Behavior therapist. I was a salesman off and on for years. I ran my own venue booking business, booking comedy acts, casinos, and bars, just to sort of stay in the industry. I wrote for things. I did some TV stuff. I worked in a real estate auction company. I've had my real estate license twice, and I can safely say I suck at all of it. I was a pretty decent delivery and pickup driver because that's easy when you know LA. But other than that, I do stand up. When your brain writes this, it writes this, and it dissects things that people say. You don't take things that they say at face value. You question everything, and it creates a healthy respect in your mind for things that have passed that test. For when you run something through the system and it makes perfect sense, then it really does create that respect. And the anger I think that Harlan felt is that you view these people who are businessmen, and we have such a worship of the wealthy in our nation. But coming from my psychology background, they're addicts. I mean, if you eat too much food, you've got a food problem. If you drink too much alcohol, you're an alcoholic. You do too much heroin, you're a drug addict. You gamble too much. We even accept you can drink too much water or play too much poker in our society. But those addictions only hurt you and your immediate family, or if someone's in front of you when you're driving down the street hammered. Wealth addiction destroys entire economies and societies. If you give the normal person, rich is fine. Rich I have no problem with. Rich is like just
That's how I feel.
most of them actually do employ working class people and help the economy and things like that. But if you've got $40 million in the bank, your next thought is, how can I make 80? How is that any different from the guy who gets a higher pay? It's free facilitated by addiction. We should view these people as our lessons, not our graders. That they need help. And so that was the perspective that I loved, that guys like Carlin and Doug Stanhope and the rest of them gave me, was that these things fall apart under even the slightest bit of examination. And yet, a lot of people never even ask that one question. Why do we view wealth as something wonderful instead of an addiction, even though they have all the symptoms of addiction? Neglecting your family in pursuit of your next high, needing more and more of the same substance, to get the same high that a little bit used to get you. That sounds like a heroin or alcohol, doesn't it? It's because they control the information. The wealthy control the information, and they won't let us call it an addiction. And so you don't want to be on that side of it. But that perspective of just like, look, all I did was ask 3 questions, and this guy became completely full of shit. Why can't the rest of the world ask those questions too, and we can take our world?
No, 100%. And it's for me, I think it was the Warren Buffett documentary on HBO. Like that really kind of, I mean, obviously there was a conception of all things streaming, all things reading, all things entertainment like never before in our house, and I'm sure a lot of others, right? But that's one that I pretty early on, like I checked out, right? And you could, I mean, geez, that dude, his theoretically speaking, if you're without the money, right? You're talking about like a guy who neglected his children, right? The guy that neglected his wife only up until she had cancer, right? And ends up moving in with the wife's best friend, and and like the way, not to spoil it, but it was just it was like a transition, like a weird transition where he just started living with this gal. Like his wife lived at their house and he just moved in with the wife's best friend, and it was just accepted, right? And these are things like, especially growing up in like this urban type deal, growing up like literally everywhere, and then hitting Inglewood in about 9, and you see people with fathers not in the house and everything like that, and like that dude, theoretically speaking, could be Warren Buffett, like in terms of social norms.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it is, we forgive the wealthy so much. Like what you're saying, we view, but in reality, if you took their behavior and put it into a trailer park, you'd never stop making fun. It's just a trailer park with better teeth, is what I say about the wealthy. But I'm from Inglewood too. I was born at Sentinella Hospital. I grew up in Ladera Heights, and yet by seeing the neighborhood change back and forth, again, talk about something I wish I had money, because I saw that Inglewood real estate market boom. But there's nowhere else to go. It's going to be booming. But I grew up in Ladera Heights, seeing like, okay, here's where there were rich black people and there were poor black people from the other side of Inglewood, all in these schools together. And I got to learn at a very early age. Oh, we like to put colors on things that are really social class problems. And social class determines your behavior way more than race does. Well, Chris Rock became a celebrity basically off that bit, where he compared the different classes of African Americans and was the first one to do it. And he said, no, screw all this unity crap. You have every right to hate a welfare mom if you got 2 jobs and you're busting your ass. And so he called out that behavior, and we very much, accepted it in him. He opened his show in D.C. by saying, Marion Barry was at the Million Man March. Even in our finest hour, there was a crackhead on stage. So he just took absolute control of that audience. He said, boo if you want, I'm right. And after that, he just had him by the balls, and they went wherever he wanted, because they knew this guy's telling the truth, whether they like it or not. And I sort of grew up with that perspective to the LA riots. I tell a joke that the crowds love, and it really happened. This friend of mine, he unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but that called me and said, they broke windows of the shoe store. We're going. Do you want anything? I said, they tried to make that like it was this race riot, like it was white on black. No, people were gathering together to loot. Like but back in those days when there wasn't 24-hour news coverage, this is one of the first events that was covered like that. That was when you sort of saw like, oh, wait a minute, they can actually, say that they're covering everything with 24-hour news, but they're leaving out every positive narrative, because if it bleeds, it leads. And so I do a lot of bits about that in my act as well. If people out there, if you have Spotify, Pandora, iTunes, I got 4 CDs on there, clean and dirty stuff. I got a Dry Bar Comedy special. That's free, the Dry Bar Comedy app. You put my name in there. YouTube, obviously, I got that. I got rants that I do like this on a separate YouTube channel called Strait Talk that I spell like my name, STRAIT, and it's just me ranting on stuff. But there's boxing stuff in there too, because of course that's something I rant on. But you are your perspectives, and I know I was doctored by it, but it was just I got to my perspective, my story was not being told, and that put something in me. And I asked my mom, who was from the same neighborhood, I go, "You're so much more calm and relaxed about that, even though the stuff you agree with me." And she goes, "Well, you have this need to be heard. I don't really have this need to be heard." And I realized that is a burden as much as it is a benefit. It's a benefit because it made me seek out a speaking career. it's something that I love doing more than I would if I felt like because I have worked behind a desk. I know I don't like it. But at the same token, that need to be heard when idiots won't listen is so. I mean, I've lost friends over this, not like close friends, but I've lost acquaintances, a lot of them, because I just can't believe that they would support something that is so obviously erroneous. And I like you said, I feel two different ways about it. I love that that information is out now. Closeted racism is not a thing because bigots now feel like they should be open to how much this was going on the whole time, and now we know about it. Also the manipulation of the news. I think that's out now. Now that we know that they've always had an agenda, now they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So giving everyone a voice has actually, it's added to the number of lies. It's reduced their effectiveness. I'll put it that way.
Yes, it has, and that again, in terms of like looking at, the last 4 years negatively in some respects, like there have been some tremendous, I guess, forward progression that have happened because things might have not been ideal, so that's I think that's one of the cool byproducts, but I mean, dude, I mean, you definitely have a unique take on things, right? I mean, I love, like, I just happened to be scrolling through Instagram, and when the when the I mean, the Biden kind of announcement happened, you literally bellowed smoke from a chimney,
That was
like
just
the
a coincidence.
yeah.
It finally got cold in LA, and my wife loves using our firewood. She actually texted me during the show saying pick up firewood. But the smoke coming out was white smoke. And I remember when you elect a new pope, because when you don't have a new pope, every day there isn't one, they put black smoke out of the chimney in Vatican City. Whenever they have decided on a new pope, it's white smoke. That's how you know. And I'm walking back home and I see that white smoke coming out. Oh, I got to film this. YouTube actually flagged that video for not being for children. Yeah, that's another thing that has to go with corporate America. Don't email me from a no reply. All right. Can we spread this word out to the world? Knock that off. If you email me, let me answer. Hire more Americans to answer those emails, or don't email. But like they give no due process of any kind. Corporations don't have to give due process anymore. They just fire you for tweeting. There's no defense of free speech. That's a downside to this too, is that people go, you can say whatever you want, but I can react any way that I want. And the downside of that is some people are reacting by distancing themselves from you, firing you. And I'm like, shouldn't we ask some questions here? I mean, Louis C.K. had his whole financial life taken away for things that weren't even crimes. He did have consent. They might have been creepy, but they weren't crimes. And my first thought was, well, even if they were crimes, what about all the other people that were on his show? What about all the actors on the Cosby Show? They can never get residual checks again because of his crime? I mean, these questions weren't even being asked, which is way too much power to give to a corporation. And that's what I fear would change under Bernie and won't change under Biden, because he's more of a centrist, is that the corporate power. Corporations are just, the wealthy elite have gone by many names through world's history. It's been chieftains, they've been sultans, they've been kings, they've been presidents, and now they are corporations. That's what the wealthy hides behind. And when I tell this to people, and I like to do this after I make a whole crowd that's very ethnically and age and gender diverse laugh at these kind of things, I will close and I will say, and I've only done this a couple of times yet because we haven't been on stage, I go, ladies and gentlemen, there's just one thing you got to remember about how you're being manipulated. They want ratings so that you'll keep watching. They know how to rile you up. They know that you would rather believe your enemy is somebody you can touch, somebody you can get back at. That's why, it's when that factory in Mississippi, 615 illegal immigrants were taken back across the border. You know who they didn't arrest? The guy that runs it.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get rid of illegal immigration? Put every American that hires an illegal immigrant in jail for 10 years. Problem solved. You could open up the border and the guys would be wandering around. How come nobody will hire me? Because we're going to jail, Paco. That's why. That's the answer. But punishing the top is something we never do because they divide us and conquer us among these things. And I'll say, just remember this. There's no such thing as race. There's no such thing as gender. There's no such thing as sexual preference. There's no such thing as different gender. And there's definitely no such thing as national belonging or immigration status. All these lines were artificially drawn to keep us fighting with each other so that we don't recognize the only real divide is the upper 1% versus everybody else. That is the only divide in the world. So, and the proof of it is, and that's not even always an ethnic divide. There are many, East Asians that belong to that group and people. So trust me when I say the guy next door who you think has all these things different with you. You're a white Jewish man. She's a black Muslim female. If you started comparing your life to hers versus one of the Rockefellers or something like that, believe me, you would have way more in common with these people you think are so much different. And the billionaires have said this. They interview them. They've said, my biggest fear is 20,000 people coming over that fence and taking everything. There have been billionaires that have said that out loud during interviews. They will do anything to maintain that, so they have to keep us fighting with each other so we don't unify and take back our wealth.
Yeah, yeah, and my wife actually, because I really admire her because she grew up so different than I, right? Like a biracial, like for me, biracial, Buddhist,
Is she Fijian
sometimes.
I'm sorry, is she Fijian Indian or native?
No. She's actually she calls herself a mutt, but I
well, that was your mom.
To that. Yeah, that was mom. So my wife is parts Filipino, Native American, Puerto Rican, Tejano, like native people of Texas,
wow.
Irish. There's a lot in there. Like between her side and then our side, we have one child together, and then 3 from a previous marriage. I just like to call them the older children, but like they represent. Four kids exactly. But I mean, it's pretty much like the model UN, just in genealogy, in terms of like our 13-year-old. He's just like, you can't really put a finger on like what he looks like, and in kind of traditional kind of Melanesian and Polynesian respects, we regrew his hair. Like he's had one trim in his 13 years of life, and and that was one of the things that I was pretty cognizant of, because obviously here in California there are cheaper places to live, right? And places where you could perceivably get a house and everything that you kind of want, you crave as somebody that is a head of household and wants to do better for their family. But theoretically speaking, I'm all like, would that work anywhere else? Like the way that we live our lives, the way that we interact with people, would that be feasible if we moved anywhere else? And again, you can't go other places and expect the exact same respects that of a place that you came from.
Cultures. Many of the cultures are in this hemisphere. Their economies aren't that great because they don't have a big middle class, like South America, where they would be okay with people of blended look. Brazil is a country that has that entirely. Paraguay made same-race marriage illegal for a while. Like back in the day, you had to, if you were indigenous and you were European, you had to intermarry. Guarani is just as popular a language as Spanish in that country, but their economies aren't so great as far as having huge middle class. Uruguay is an exception. But you go to European countries that have these great democratic socialist, huge middle class, great education, not a lot going on. As far as that goes, you can live very well and very tolerant of a lot of things. They do have a nationalism problem in those countries. Their immigrant groups do have to fight a lot harder, and you don't have to do a lot to look ethnically confusing to them. like Italian is rowdy in that country, in Scandinavian countries. But they have centuries old nativity, which we don't have here. I mean, we do, but we've mostly slaughtered it in the Native Americans. But for and also we have to, you become at a certain point, nativity starts to look ridiculous to you, because the idea of nativity to me means where you personally are from. Other than that, it means nothing. I heard somebody say this once, goes, we know where most life has started. I've actually been there in South Africa, the cradle of humankind. And to me, unless you live in the Central Rift Valley of Africa, you're not native to wherever you live. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I mean, we can even draw through bloodlines and DNA, the Mongolians, we can tie them to Native Americans because we know that they are related. So, and me, you really look at a white South African or a white American, I'm 14, 15 generations deep. But according to Ancestry DNA, I'm almost entirely Anglo-Saxon, Irish, and Scandinavian. But it's gray now, but I have dark brown hair. I tan. If I go back to the old country, I am taller and darker than virtually everybody there. Yet my bloodline is theirs. Why is that? That's the evolution of survival in the desert. So science and religion are not opposing concepts. I don't know. We do that to divide, but it's evolution is very real. We're becoming a taller, more global nation, and people that are I joke about it with tall people. I go, because the human race is getting taller. I'm not tall. I'm just ahead of my time. Because we'll all be this tall
That's
soon.
great.
Tell your son to say the same thing. Oh, you look so blended. He goes, no, that's what I look like. Everybody will look in 100 years. said, people like my daughter with her red hair and green eyes, that's going to be an old school look in another century or two, because we're all going to have that. And there'll still be divergent, but it's going to be less of a difference as we all, eventually have more blended DNA from a global world.
No, absolutely, absolutely, man. It's just, I just think it's fun, right? Because there, and that's what I try to kind of empathize with, like, opinions or thoughts that are different than my own, right? Everybody arrives to a particular scenario or way they vote or way they live their life, whatever, because certain bits of their upbringing, their evolution of self, right?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
specific things that have happened that made them feel the way that they do. Then they
Yeah.
are totally, completely, I mean, almost alienated from my experience, right? And it could be like the way that my sister and I, there's two of us, but the way that she interpreted a lot of things as the younger female versus
Yeah.
me, the older male, is completely different. So it's just, it's all about perspective. And I hopefully think, I mean, I really hope, right, that spanning from all of this, like, we get an apathy for each other. Like, we don't have to agree. And that has always been the case, right? There has always been a case where you could respectfully disagree, right? I respectfully disagree. That was something that was uttered many a times, and I mean, recently we lost, or actually over the weekend, we lost Alex Trebek
Yeah.
Jeopardy, right? And that was something when, like, a contestant said something completely asinine, that was
Yeah.
something that he floated out of his mouth. Like, I respectfully disagree. He could have ate him up, right, with all the
Oh,
intellect,
yeah.
or Wolf Blitzer, when Wolf Blitzer made the Celebrity Jeopardy, and he's supposed to be this bastion of knowledge, anchor of CNN, and he was, I mean, dumb as dog shit, theoretically speaking.
Oh no, and Jeff Foxworthy did really well. Like years ago when Jeff
Yes.
Foxworthy was on Celebrity Jeopardy, he was winning. So just because, and he's always said, I don't consider redneck stupid, and I don't either. He said it's just a glorious absence of sophistication. But even he tended to skew conservative in politics. You kind of are what you're around a little bit more. I think the global world is ending that, but it's ending that slowly. So there are families that are divided. And yes, I would hope that creating more differences makes it too exhausting to divide ourselves by those differences. We're not there yet, but the road could lead to that because there's just so many things to tribalize about. I mean, that you're not paying attention to initial connection. I mean, James Carville and his wife, obviously polar opposite in politics. That can happen. But if you sometimes say, okay, well, what's the goal? What do you want to see at the end? What would be the perfect world to you? Now, if they tell you some kind of white nationalist answer or some kind of black Israelite extermination or whatever that group is, then yes, that's racism, that's xenophobia. You don't have to ally with those people. You can say, look, that is not my tribe. I hope they never get power. They are unevolved. Look what they did when they had power. So I get that view. But to not acknowledge that there are going to be side effects with your side winning. I mean, I was a Republican for the first few elections of my life because at the time, ethnic quotas were a big thing and Reaganomics hadn't shown itself to be the disaster it ended up being. So I thought that, like, oh my God, I'm not even going to be able to get to college. They're going to do this and that. I out of self-preservation. But as time went on, I actually got a little bit more liberal, but the divide also changed. Like the whole country, the right went super right. So the left came to the middle. And so what I like about these last few years is it's created a far left as well to balance things out. Now you've got a sane Republican again, which you didn't have. You've got like the John McCain, he was kind of an island unto himself. You've got the Mitt Romneys and the Michael Steeles and people that don't want to be identified with being, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham might have won their elections, but what they are and who they represent is clearly going away. And you don't want to be on that side anymore. And so that's kind of what I would hope would come from this, is that the two-party system, which does not serve our country, would eventually go away because now there's 5-6 levels of, progressive to conservative, and you've got to call yourself what you really are, So and a two-party system doesn't doesn't serve a country of this size. I don't know if it ever did, but now that our population is, what, 15 times what it was at our country's inception, we really need more options.
Exactly. And Jesse says, exactly. I'm not going to hate you or disagree. There's always exceptions, but people can't do that anymore, it seems. No, absolutely. And that's, again, it's just, being able to, I mean, I just got through watching Dave Chappelle on SNL, right? I personally, I mean, it was great. I personally don't like, racial epithets, right? N-word, I don't use it. But I mean, that is like, and maybe it's also because like my mom coming from British Commonwealth, but like what those things, those sodium filled things that you put in soup, those will always be biscuits in our households. Those aren't, because that's a euphemism, like a negative euphemism, for Anglos, right? So it's just like, but having that respect, right, and being able to kind of see each other, in ways that sometimes are uncomfortable, right? But being able to see it and go like, okay, that is what it is, and they may be true to you, because there's no, like, in my early 20s, like, I wanted to convince people like, your side is wrong, and that's what you want to do, right? You get misdirection and like testosterone just like buzzing through you, and subsequently supplementing it with alcohol and other, right? You just, you just go. But like for me, what I'm seeing, especially the last 4 years have taught me, was there's no convincing, right? There's no amount of facts, there's no amount of anything that you could present to somebody that, I mean, will die on that particular hill, that you could do to say, to convince them. So I'm just like, why even? Like, let me figure out what
as a psychologist. As a psychology person who studied that, I viewed it's like, first of all, there's some people, it's like the abused child theory. It's also like the narcissist and the sociopath. Being that way is self-preservation. You get to a certain point where you cannot self-examine, because if you start to really take responsibility and suddenly realize and have that moment of whatever, it shouldn't mean this, but a lot of those people commit suicide because they've just gotten so far in. They're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I've screwed over everybody I know, and it really was all my fault. And that should create a depression that maybe you need to come out of, but a lot of people don't come out of it. I mean, I encourage, it's delicate, because I want people to experience that, because when you come through on the other side of that, what you feel and who you are is way more wizened and way more comfortable, and you have a ton more confidence in it and yourself. But at the same time, I know that a lot of these MAGA hats guy, if they really stopped and looked at what they voted in and what they caused and how many deaths and how many lives ruined from what they have supported, a lot of them would off themselves, and I don't want that, So it's kind of like, I get sucked into the fight. I do. And, because I've been that way on other sides too. I mean, I've supported things that I later went, wow, that does have a bad, future outcome to it. And I did not want to be the fact that I supported that. I've had things I've said to people where I cringe. It's like, ugh, but those moments educate you and make you less likely to do it in the future. So it's a delicate balance of trying to catch somebody who maybe was skewing a little bit towards a dangerous place before they full on make it their identity. Because once they make it their identity, there's no turning back. I mean, like I said, Trump hasn't presented a single iota of evidence that the election is corrupt. He never built the wall. He didn't fix healthcare or didn't even introduce anything new. So all his promises, if you look at the facts, were not done, and they can't argue those facts. But you see these people and think they're stealing the election. They've just made their existence. I'm going to hear what he says, and I'm going to ape it out loud. And anyone that says differently has to be wrong. And these obvious forgeries of screenshots are being sent around as if they're real. And I'm not a graphic designer. If I can figure it out, you have no excuse. So, but it's just that they need to grasp onto anything that justifies their existence. They've made it too important to who they are. And so I have to learn from that, because that's definitely a thing on the left as well. It's the women that were just getting off on taking down men, whether they were guilty or not, in this new woke culture. It's like, it was the most predatory behavior by people who were supposedly against predators. So there was a major hypocrisy to it. So I said, you know what, this thought of you're being hypocrites, I get it. It's this thought of like, look, it's not as if a different group of people were in power, things would have happened differently. It's like power was corrupting. That's what did it. So we have to change the system that rewards too much power to those who cannot handle or don't have the strength of character to handle it. That's the system that needs to change, not the attitude of, well, if everybody gets their turn to oppress, then I guess we're all even. It's like, no, if you're playing on a shitty playing field, you don't switch sides at halftime. You find a new field. And so, that's where I hope the delicate balance leads us to. If we just change our attitude to the point, like, look, let's stop keeping score and just restart. The whole government needs an overhaul of some of the people, yes, but that can happen in any election. Of the systems, the triple branch thing is a good idea, but representative democracy needs to be shifted more to rule of the people, and any law that does not support that should go. And I think that people are way too hesitant to try something new. They think it's always been that way and they can't make it any different. And to come back to that earlier fear, that's the fear I wish we would shed. It's like, and anyone says, oh, but the founding fathers said that, well, we're going to let the big states control the whatever. We can always switch it back. They tried an Olympic scoring system in boxing. They tried a point scoring system after all the corruption. Turned out to be way worse, even more corrupt. So what happened? They got rid of it, went back to judges. And after one Olympics, they were finally able to say, oh, yes, it's still corrupt, but now we know where the corruption's coming from because we tried something new. And they fired everybody. And the next Olympics, the AIBA doesn't even exist. So we can make changes, but we never know until we try.
Exactly. And Jesse says, oh, for sure, people are set in the ways no matter what. And unfortunately, that is true. But one question, right? I mean, you're a comedian, right? So Jesse presents a theory in saying that Dave Chappelle is the greatest of all time. I personally don't dig the greatest of all time, whether it be combat sports or anything, right? Because it's, to me, especially when you go like combat sports, I think eras, weight classes, those are the things that kind of differ. You can probably arrive at like the 2000s greatest middleweight of all time in MMA. With a consensus pick should theoretically be Anderson Silva, right? But I mean, obviously, it for somebody that didn't see Anderson Silva in his prime and just saw his last performance, they're like, how can you figure that guy out? Like what, So if we're doing comedy, right? If you had a top 5 of comics, whether it be local, names we know, names we don't know, that have influenced you in a positive way, and what would they be? Like, who would they be?
Well, at first, like I said, I grew up watching the comedy movies, so I'd say the Zucker brothers and Mel Brooks were my first big influences. My parents had Bill Cosby and Bob Newhart and Smothers Brothers albums. I was 9, 10, 11 years old listening to those. And then when I was 13, a friend of mine handed me a Dice Clay tape, Andrew Dice Clay. That was the summer he became famous. And I found my dad's old Richard Pryor greatest hits tape. And so wow, you can be dirty and do this too? Because of course, if you're 13, every thought you have is dirty. So then my sort of likes shifted to people like Sam Kinison, and then there it is, and Richard Pryor, George Carlin, and then of course Chris Rock, Doug Stanhope, and Bill Burr later on, and Dave Chappelle. I mean, I was a fan of his in the mid '90s before he really broke. He was still kind of trying to be an actor / comedian, but it wasn't until he really got real that he became famous. And because he did like pull a Muhammad Ali and give up a big chunk of his career for his beliefs or what have you, just to sort of walk away and be an outsider, that's also created the lore, because he's come back and I think cranked out 6-hour specials or 5 in a 3-year span that have all been brilliant. And and at a time when we really, really needed it. And he's been fairly untouchable. He smokes on stage and he'll use the N-word and he'll call people out, trans people, for jumping the line, of groups to be accepted. They're saying, we elected our first trans man. I'm like, yeah, but about 1% of the population is trans. Atheists and agnostics are 20% of the population. They have no representation. So we're not done yet. Okay. So let's celebrate the victories, but we're not finished because you pick a few woke groups, So, and someone like Chappelle will point those things out by not letting people take themselves too seriously. And I rail against offended culture because I think from a psychology background, I see it for what it is. It's okay to disagree. anytime you see something, you form an opinion about it. Say, I don't like that. We've lost those words. I don't like that. I disagree with it. It didn't make me laugh. It's not my thing. I wish we said those things. But saying I'm offended, there's a selfishness to that. If the word offense is in that, as a boxing guy, I see that word for what it is. In order to take offense, I have to give offense to you. I have to be trying to hit you. I have to say something to you personally. People don't realize that. I think they can be offended by a tweet they saw randomly, or Steve Harvey talking about the time a woman came up to him after he talked about drunk driving and said, I lost my son in a drunk driving crash. How dare you bring that up? It's like, ma'am, I didn't know you were coming. Probably still would have did it because there's lots of other people here, but the selfishness of the audience has gotten really out of control. And it used to be the best service, and real audience members, most of them still get this. They're like, I'm going there to forget about who I am, or to get validation for something I may have thought that I thought nobody thought. Comedy serves that. When you laugh, you're out of yourself. You can take on messages you don't agree with because they made you laugh about them. And we're losing that because of the offended culture. And I want to call it out for what it is. It's selfishness. It's drunk with power. You get off on ruining a career. So you're going to pretend, and being offended is like a traffic cop. If nobody is speeding, eventually he's going to start pretending people are speeding because he's got to write tickets to justify his existence. And that's the same thing. If nobody's offensive, they'll just move the marker to where just being a white male on stage is offensive, to where just, questioning something is offensive, not taking it for granted. And when they say, it's like, no, if somebody feels that way, you're supposed to honor it. I go, so let me get this straight. You want to dissect every word that comes out of my mouth, regardless of what I tell you it really meant. You want to create your own meaning and attach your own definition to my words, but I can't analyze you at all? That's pretty selfish and weird. So I would say, if someone goes, I'm offended, what you say back to them is, show your work. Turn math teacher on their ass. Like, show your work. Show me what's offensive about it, because this is what I would hope woke culture would agree to and would understand. Your feelings do not create a fact. Right. Your feelings are your experience with something. But like, just because you feel raped doesn't mean there was a rape. I mean that literally, or I mean it figuratively as well. I feel raped every time I watch Fox News, but I can't sue them for rape because they're not literally doing that. That's my feelings and my reaction to what they're doing. They're lying to me, they're doing this, whatever. You can get angry, but your experience with it doesn't create their intention, and it doesn't create a fact. So it's like you have to go by what was really done and what was really said. And when someone tells you this is what I mean by that, that's what they mean by that. You can't really attach a new thing to it.
No, I agree. But I mean, attaching new things, right, to your repertoire, that is something that has
someone else.
Yeah, I think you've done it pretty well, right? Because you've seamlessly, integrated two of your loves, right? The love for comedy as well as your love for combat sports. So I want to get into like what was whether it be boxing or otherwise, like what kind of set your heart on fire about combat sports? Like, was there a particular match?
Yeah, well, let's look at what they both have in common. I mean, it's you against the world. It's not a team. They're the scariest things for other members of your category. Athletes always talk about boxers being the most in shape and the scariest thing for them. It's like you just charged into a 300-pound man. You think what I do is scary? Comedy, same thing. Actors and musical theater people talk about, I can think of nothing more scary than singing in front of people. But they tell me what I do is the scariest thing in the world. So people have a lot of respect for what you do. And they're the only jobs like that I've had. And also because I wasn't a very good fighter instinctively. I'm not built right for the sport of boxing, but I really identified with being tough enough, to do that. And it seemed like it was the greatest way to overcome the most amount of fears. If I'm scared to say this, I'm scared to challenge that guy. But if I get myself in the right amount of shape, if I learn how to do this, if I learn how to box, it'll take away some of those fears, which it did. You still have the fear of getting in trouble. So I'm not a street fighter. Even when I was younger, I didn't like doing that. But the ability to say whatever I want came from the confidence that comedy and other things like that gave me. And just both, you get better by failing. So you don't need to be afraid to try. I mean, people with losses early and even in their amateur careers became way better because of it. People who got on stage and bombed became great because of it. And I watched Rocky movies and I was so into the Rocky story. Like I said, I listened to comedy albums. I was a big Beatles fan. I was a big James Bond fan. But, those things, I still like them to an extent, but they didn't remain passions the way boxing did. I think it's because my mom saw me watching all the Rocky movies and said, real boxing doesn't look like that. And back then it was on network TV all the time in the 80s. So I used to just turn on the fights and I just fell in love with it. I bought magazines, KO magazine back when that was a thing. And I just got into it. It just became something I routinely followed and just kept on top of. I went to boxing gyms and my dad thought I was going to quit, but I stuck with that. At my weight classes, I couldn't find fights on the West Coast because back then, before the MMA craze, everyone thought MMA was going to bury boxing. It saved it in a lot of neighborhoods, I think. MMA brought boxing back to an audience that it didn't have since the 70s. White middle-class America had pretty much gone away from it. They were into other martial arts if they were into fighting sports at all. And where I live in Torrance, this is where the Gracies landed. This is where Chuck Norris's first school was. This is where there's the largest concentration of Japanese and some Korean as well in the area. So you can't walk down the street without tripping over a fighting sport place. I couldn't find it. I had to drive to South Central before the 105 freeway to train at the Broadway gym and cover the box. My parents didn't want to take me there all the time, so I was never trained enough in good enough shape. I got into a couple tournaments, and I did win them. The one official one that I was in, I did win, but most of my fights were like smokers or backyard boxing matches because they're the only things I could find. Back then, they didn't have the internet where you could just look up boxing gyms. There were some in Venice I found out about later, but I didn't know about them at the time because they didn't advertise. You had to be in this circle that I wasn't in. Nowadays, middle-class kids can find boxing in much the same way Muay Thai fighters turn over. You go to a fight in one sport and your honest trainer tells you, look, you've got more power in your hands. Go this way. There have been guys that show up, because it used to be you had to make yourself. A friend of mine, Ian Harris, who's an MMA trainer and a comedian as well, he made himself a mixed martial artist by boxing, by taking Jeet Kune Do, by taking grappling arts, by learning all these things separately. That used to be the way you had to do it. Now they're training them in mixed martial arts, and if they're better at one thing than the other, steering them away. Like, you're strictly a ground game guy, and you're really good in school. Colleges have great wrestling programs. Look into Iowa. They're telling them things like that. And that's where I think we're going to start to see that shift. You're going to see more middle-class kids like a Marco Antonio Barrera or a Jarrett Hurd, getting into the sport where they would, those are rare names now. But I think you're going to see more of that because fighting sports have gone across that wayside. And I've used my failure to really catch on in boxing. By the time I was getting fights, I was a heavyweight. I couldn't take advantage of being skinny and tall anymore. I'm 6'6". At one point, I was 6'1", 135. I wish I was boxing then. How easy would the lightweight division have been for me back then? I was I was 6'5", 175 at one point. But by my mid-20s, I was a heavyweight, and my iron chin at those lower weights wasn't so iron when I was getting hit by those guys. I've still never had a bloody nose. I don't know how I escaped that. But I sparred a few times with Carlos Monroe. He fought Vladimir Klitschko twice. And it's just like, I used to spar with Sam Simon, the producer of The Simpsons, who was the manager of Edmund Brewster and a few other guys. And that guy hit like a ton of bricks. And wow, even the behind-the-scenes people, and he was like me, a comedian who loved boxing and sort of made it his hobby. But it's just they had a lot of that me against the world attitude. So that's what I loved about both of them. So I've kept them in my life. And I always say I was probably a better announcer and commentator in boxing than I would have been a fighter. I definitely, like I said, I don't have the broad shoulders, the giant hands, the big head that takes those. I would have probably leapt out to an early good record and lost when I stepped up. In comedy, it's kind of like you find a niche market with the way you do your thing, and better isn't even a thing. There's a lot of people who aren't very good, but they've gone after a demographic, and there's a lot of Christian comics that make a bank that you'll never have heard of. There's a lot of guys who you've heard of, like Chris D'Elia, that would absolutely eat it in front of just your average audience, but he's got his group that he kills in front. And so it had more niche markets, more ways, and then you could do it forever. You could work till you were 80 or 90, like a Don Rickles, if you wanted to. Whereas, in boxing, I didn't want to be slurring in my 30s.
Yeah, man, that's kind of the reason why. I mean, theoretically speaking, I always wanted to do like the media side of things. I mean, my maternal grandfather in Fiji was literally like the first Fijian-born broadcaster in the entire country's history. Before that, it was just BBC, right? So I figured I'm half ADOS, half, Melanesian. I'm going to be like 6'4". I'm 6'6". Like my dad was 6'4". I had aunts over 6'2", women in my family that were like, I mean, towering. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be a giant. I'm gonna go and do professional wrestling in Japan because I appreciated that versus like the WWE style and whatever. And then I would blow out my knees and then hunker down into some commentary position, right? Well, you've seen me. I'm all of 5'9". The recessive
Yeah.
trait is fucking strong like a motherfucker,
Yeah.
but it's progressed, and for the last 4 years, I've been able to not only do this, but also, I grew up everywhere. Born in San Francisco, we lived in Fiji for a time, back to Marin County, Indiana, Las Vegas, Georgia, New Mexico, and then landing in Inglewood. I've never felt a bit of community or felt like I fit in any community, and it took me to find this, right, that was an afterthought or something that my mom pushed me to do, versus me wanting to do it, and then my mom passing away, and like, maybe I should try it, and
Yeah.
we've paid her, and the fact that I've been able to, have good friends, much like yourself, and a lot of people far more talented than I, and just kind of sit under the ring tree and go like, okay, let me take a little bit of that, let me take a little bit of that, and figure it all out. And it's been beautiful, and especially at a time where the country and many aspects of the world have been kind of at an acrimonious kind of a plane. I almost wish that the politicians did more combat sports. The people that
Yeah.
are, like, we needed more combat sports in our world than ever before.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I thank Steve Bash, of course, and his partner at the time, Karan Haratunian, for giving me that shot first 12 years ago to do commentary. I called fights with my partner, Chris Shula, for a while there, who's also a trainer and an actor. And but I got to call fights with Paulie Malignaggi, Andre Ward. In fact, I'm the answer to an obscure trivia question. I'm the first guy either of them called fights with, and they go on to these careers. I never did. But the with my buddy Adam Hunter, I called fights with him. Who of course, he's a big MMA comic, and Carlos Palomino, and a bunch of guys who I got to sit there ringside with and just talk fights. Harold Letterman, Jimmy Lennon Jr. And and it's just been a great experience to be able to sit down with these people who you've taught, and I was on radio shows with Joe Goosen, and really, like, and 3 times during the show he went, "Wow, you really know your stuff," and that just meant the world to hear that, to be accepted as kind of one of them. And that was a feeling that I didn't get when I was actually training to box. I had a few trainers. Dub Huntley, at the time that he was Layla Ali's trainer, was my trainer. And he said, if you like this game, you could do something with it. You have the skill for it. So, but I just realized I didn't have the mentality for it. I didn't have the mentality to actually box there. But when I started calling the fights, I'm like, oh, this is where I fit into this world. I probably don't have the patience to be a trainer or a teacher type. I probably don't have the business savvy to be a manager the right way. A co-manager maybe, but like a promotion side I can do. But promoter, I don't have the money for that. So, but I can talk about this sport until the walls come tumbling down. So this is probably where I have a voice that sounds like that anyway. So this is probably where I belong, and I got to see that there. And that's one thing that they do have in common, boxing and comedy, with me, is that moment. And I felt it more on the ships than I ever did being at the Improv and hanging out and doing sets and having guys like Neil Brennan or Eddie Ift or Russell Peters have me, say, I like what you do. You're a good writer. That's special too. That very much is. But working on the cruise ships with these guys I grew up watching on TV and being their equal, and us having the same reaction from fans, and being their friends now. Like, I was a 15, 16-year-old kid watching them back then. Stand up was all over TV. And just, wow, that life. And then to be 30 years later being their peer and their equal. That's the feeling that I've only really gotten from, to feel like no matter what kind of money problems we're going through, because the game has changed, thinking like, wow, I made it. I am these people who I looked up to. I like I said, I can never fight like those guys could fight. I can't play the guitar like those guys could play. I can't hit the jump shot, and I'm definitely not going to make billions in real estate. So other people that I looked at or maybe admired, that I couldn't be, like, the commentator in boxing and the comedian himself, actually on stage, like those 2 times I got accepted by the people I looked up to. And that's an amazing feeling.
That's what you work for your heroes to become your peers. That's important, and that's something that is unforshakable. Nobody can take away from you because again, like you said, you're kind of a trivia question, like an obscure trivia question. But again, people are going to remember or at least know the name. Like it's everybody sees Ryan Seacrest and knows him as the perennial host, but like there was Brian Dunkelman beforehand, so like
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know
Yeah, yeah.
so I'm just saying, which I gotta ask, right? So in terms of boxers that have influenced you,
Yeah.
uh, who are they?
Many for different reasons. Tyson was the first guy to really get me into the sport. At a time when he was getting a lot of people into it, but I just stayed super into it. First KO magazine I bought was he was 17-0, about to fight Ferguson, and it was like January of '86. I just turned 10 that month, and so yeah, he was somebody who I followed from the time that he was kind of breaking on the national stage. Now, guys don't fight twice a month anymore. You would never get to a title shot that young. Everything gets dragged out now. Everything happens on weekends now. There's no more midweek fights, which I hate.
Mm-hmm.
That we make everything's got to happen on a Saturday, even during quarantine. It's like there's no crowd. Do it on Wednesday morning. Who cares? We're all home watching. It doesn't matter. But that changed to comedy too. The 7-week comedy club is down to a weekend. It's like every time there's a bad economy, we get rid of midweek stuff. I think also because we just have a lot of entertainment. But no, to go back, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was your question initially?
It's the boxers that influence you. You mentioned
Oh, boxing.
Tyson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tyson was amazing, and Muhammad Ali for just his story and his story arc, how he goes from like one of the most hated to one of the most beloved people in the world, and the most recognizable face in the world was a boxer. That's a big deal to me. And I admired some of the guys that stood against the crowds, the guys that were fearless, the guy in a way that I could never be. Like Greg Haugen, I loved, for just standing in the face of the hype machines of like, when the Latino fan base was growing, he'd fight their heroes in their backyard and trash talk them. He fought Pernell Whitaker in Norfolk. He fought Pazienza in Rhode Island. He fought Chavez in Mexico City in front of
Mm-hmm.
130,000 people screaming for his head and came into the ring to Born in the USA. I just always,
Mm-hmm.
he was the first guy to beat Camacho and just trash talked him the whole time. Mr. Trash Talking himself was getting trash talk. I liked those guys um, as well. Just there were Roy Jones just for the sheer athleticism and skill to watch was just amazing. Um, and some of the comeback kids that came from losing records when they were younger, like a Mike Weaver or a Johnny Nelson that like lost 3 out of their first 4 fights, ended up world champions. I love those comeback stories. Even though Nelson wasn't always the most exciting guy to watch, some of those guys, they can be boring. From the more modern days, people I look at and like now, was big Triple G fan. I love how well-rounded his game was. I think probably the most iron chin in the modern times, as far as like where nobody even like gets. If you're a brutal puncher like David Lemieux, maybe he'll change the look on his face. But other than that, that's about it. Like the skills of Canelo, but like most Mexican stars, the hype machine kind of. I don't like guys that win bad decisions. It turned me off to Chavez and how overrated he was. It turned me off to a handful of other fighters. If you win multiple dubious decisions, you kind of fall off my radar. Naoya Inoue is an amazing talent. I don't think he's unbeatable. I think he'll have some close ones that kind of go against him, unless he gets out soon. But I mean, just an amazing power puncher, tremendous. Bud Crawford, love the skill and just the badassness of him. Like he literally is in fights where he's not better than the other guy, but he's smarter and adjusts and gets ahead of the game. So yeah, a lot of great fighters that I've loved. But if you make me pick a favorite from a time period, I mean, I probably my favorite fighter right now is Tyson Fury.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, like Ali, people don't realize the parallels between Fury and Ali. They want to dismiss anyone being compared to Ali. No one's a bigger Ali fan than me. Trust me, these are real parallels. First of all, to start out hated because of your religious or cultural views and end up being beloved when you let the world into your mental struggle and show more of your personality. Losing a few years of your career to personal issues, which when you
Mm-hmm.
might have been at your prime, they both lost their mid-20s because of that. No one had ever seen anybody that size move like that until they came around. Before Ali, only lightweights danced like that. He was a big heavyweight that moved like that. Tyson Fury,
Mm-hmm.
6'9", 285. Nobody his size moves like that. And to sort of be an outspoken personality as well, but self-effacing. being like able to roast you, but funny at the same time, and able to roast themselves. And so yeah, the parallels there are definitely big. So those are probably historically my favorite fighter was Ali. Right now, it's probably.
I like it.
Gone like an hour and a half because I do these long-winded circular answers, but sometimes that's all I get to.
No, that's great. No, I love it. So I mean, I gotta ask you, right? Obviously, we're probably about weeks away from two of your favorites, right? All-time favorites, Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. competing
Yeah.
a stone's throw away from you in Carson, right? I mean, you're in Torrance, over in Carson. What do you say? How do you say it goes?
Um, I gotta say, I mean, can you still hear me okay? Because I've lost picture. I mean,
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
picture
we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, yeah. And I will say, again, I think it's weird. It's hard to say because is it gonna be like what do they both still have left? I thought Roy should have retired. I thought, if I could change Roy's career, I would have had him pull back that last punch in the first Montel Griffin fight so he's not DQ'd. Then I would have had him fight Mike Tyson after the Ruiz fight in 03. Then he would have been the one retiring 50-0 because I think at the time Tyson was too slow for him and was also
Right.
too slow. He's not used to being slow, is what I mean. There's a way that you can fight, like Deontay Wilder giving up 3 inches in height or 2 inches in height to Tyson Fury. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're always taller or looking a guy in the eye, it might as well be 3 feet because he couldn't fight inside. I think Mike Tyson not having the faster hands than his opponent would have shut him out there. And people look at it now, well, what about Roy's chin? We didn't know that then. He'd never gotten caught.
Right.
His career apart when he started getting caught because he tried to go back down in weight. Whereas for Mike, he's not going to be the faster guy, and he knows that now. And he's got 15 years of not taking any shots, and he can get in good shape. If he treats it like an exhibition, Roy will outbox him. If he treats it like a real fight, I think he traps him and probably stops him with, my guess, maybe body shots or a temple shot. I don't think he's really going to try to cripple Roy. I think he's just talking a good game to get people interested. But it just depends on what each guy has left. Tyson because of age and time. Roy Jones because of damage that he took by fighting way too long till his mid to late 40s. He's only been retired a few years now. Gut
3, 4
instinct
years,
says,
maybe.
yeah, gut instinct says Roy outboxes him for a while and Tyson traps him and finishes him with something.
I like it. I mean, it's funny because when the fight got announced, I was just like, I was pretty dismissive up until I heard them both on Rogan. I heard them both on Rogan, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm in." I mean, it did exactly what it needed to do to sell me on this fight. Each of them on Rogan. I mean, this time around, obviously, the total mindset, body transformation of Tyson from the first time he was on Rogan to about 2 years ago to like now, that right there sold it. And then, I mean, just bringing it home with Roy Jones on probably about like a month and a half ago, and I'm like, I'm so in for this one. I can't wait, And I kind of balked at like Roy Jones as the guy, the dream matchup for Tyson, but I forgot that Roy Jones won a heavyweight title, so like, it's not as far fetched as I guess some outsiders would believe it to be.
Yeah, no, it is. It's and also just the size of different fighters. The thing was that Roy Jones was only got like an inch in height, maybe a couple inches in reach down on Ruiz, and was much faster. And Ruiz was not a great single shot puncher, so it was the perfect guy to pick. But he didn't get to cherry pick from a ton. I mean, Ruiz had a belt, and the champ at the time was Lennox Lewis, who was basically a super heavyweight. There's 2 heavyweight divisions. So it's that's the other thing I wish I could do in boxing is I'd love to revamp, not the original 8, because I think we've evolved as a species beyond that. But I'd love to have like maybe 10 divisions and redo them like MMA has done, like make it sort of mirror that a bit. I think that would be effective for boxing. But Roy was could have still made super middleweight when he was winning titles at light heavyweight. So, and the cruiserweight division just wasn't a moneymaker then. I mean, now maybe when Usyk was in it, it could have been. But he leapt up to take on a guy that was going to be functionally 30 pounds heavier than him. But yet, is that any weirder than asking Chris Bird to win fights around that same time period when he weighed 210 and the guy that he was up against was 250? So yeah, a line was drawn between where he was and others. But at that very same time, James Toney came from middleweight, beat Holyfield later that same year. So it's not that out of the realm of possibility that the smaller guy beats the bigger guy. especially when Tyson was, by modern standards, a smallish heavyweight. In fact, he won't have height and reach. Roy has the advantage in both.
Yeah, man. I want to see it happen. Like I've actually, stepped away from making a prediction because like I kind of just want to see it happen. I just want to see what it's like. Obviously, Tyson enlisting Rafael Cordero as his cornerman. Like I just there's so many like questions that I need solved that I didn't know that I need solved until like again those 2 episodes of Rogan, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm in. I'm fucking in. I can't
I'm
believe I was
amazed they
saying
got
I'm
it
in.
sanctioned, though. I mean, yeah, I'm amazed they got it sanctioned. In fact, my favorite Rogan episode recently was when he kind of goes, and it takes a sad tone, just like how Deontay Wilder's just coming apart mentally after the
Yeah,
Tyson Fury fight. And
yeah,
just, all the accusations. And yeah, a couple of them, if you look at some pictures, it looks weird, but the gloves look weird, but they don't look weird in any way that would give an advantage. Like you definitely can't put, something in the glove afterwards. But if you could alter your wraps to slide down, it seems like, yeah, I could hit him with the wrist, but isn't that more of a danger of you breaking your wrist than hurting him? Why would you want to hit him with the wrist or bring your fist down to the wrist? Yeah, how do they not catch that? Because the glove would come off. So, or his own trainer spiked his what? Said, dude, you got beat because you didn't know how to fight as the smaller guy. In
uh-huh.
fact, what I do, what I suggest fighters do if you're watching, play devil's advocate when your career is over, or when you're not, when you got kids in the gym that look different than you, teach them what drove you crazy about their body type. You talked about being 5'9", I talked about being 6'6". There were short guys in the gym that I actually got the better of in sparring, even though I knew they were better than me, because I was taught by guys like them how and when to use the jab and frustrate them so that they can't even get to me. 300 pounds of dynamite with a quarter-inch fuse is not a threat. If he can't get to you, you can't load it. It's that you can beat fighters that are better than you if you know how to use your height, is what they told me. So when I see young guys in the gym, and I haven't been to a gym in a while because of all this, but like shorter fighters, I'll tell them, look, here's what drives me crazy when a short fighter does it. Do this. It's like, and I say, go look up tapes of Jake LaMotta fighting Sugar Ray Robinson, probably the greatest of all time. And LaMotta gave him hell because he out jabbed the taller fighter and had an iron chin against a major puncher. So he wouldn't go away, and Ray couldn't start his offense. So I was like, if you could out jab a taller fighter, he'll give up his height and start falling into you. So it's like that schooling sort of needs to be there for those fighters. And Wilder was just, he got by on that big right hand for way too deep in his career. Like Nassim Hamed, when he finally got exposed, he was still one of the greatest featherweights of all time. But what are you going to do at 30 years old or 29? Go back and relearn the sport? No, you've been figured out. So you kind of have to retire or completely relearn everything. And that's what Wilder's facing right now. He either needs to just accept, look, I was champ for 5 years, 10 defenses, millions of dollars, and and a bronze medal. Let me just walk away now. Or he has to come to California, find Abel Sanchez, Manny Robles, or Joe Goosen, and learn inside game and a left hook. He's got to learn how to fight inside. Tyson Fury has an 85-inch reach. That's John Jones numbers in reach. And yet John Jones has ground game. He's not relying on that reach. Tyson Fury knows how to fight inside. So even though you can tell when long arm fighters fight inside, they don't have the torque of a short arm fighter. They don't hurt you as much as when they're outside, but they know how to do it enough to discourage people from not wanting to get inside on. So if Wilder isn't willing to learn inside game the way I think Anthony Joshua has been willing to learn, then he's not going to beat anyone that has reach and speed on him, and Fury has both.
Yeah, that's why it makes it so special. And especially right now, in terms of boxing, I think the point could be made. You could tell, where a particular, the interest of the sport is by judging the heavyweight division, right? And the fact in recent years we had 4 heavyweights rather than just 1 or 2, with Ruiz, Joshua, Wilder, Fury, it's just. It's just a crazy, crazy time, man. Like I can't think of a better time in all of combat sports, right? That everybody's making money, everybody wanting to learn. It's just, I mean, this is like the industrial revolution, so to speak, of combat sports, and also ways to consume it. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, with between the streaming sites and the cable sites kind of merging in a way. I mean, I think that DAZN will eventually have a presence on, things like Spectrum and DirecTV, and I think ESPN has gone for ESPN Plus. It's a little confusing now because you don't know, say, is this fight going to be on regular ESPN or ESPN Plus or ESPN pay-per-view? And there's certain models that I think will be left behind. Canelo recently jumped ship from DAZN, and now he's supposed to be fighting for PBC, which means you're going to be paying $100 for pay-per-views again, because that's what Al Haymon still does. But I think that with those numbers being low, which they will, that'll eventually kill the pay-per-view model, which served its function for a while. But I think that eventually the paying an overall amount for streaming and then just getting your big pay-per-views in there. I mean, how good were the numbers for Lopez versus Lomachenko? Because that was just a free fight on ESPN, like a gift to the fans kind of a thing. And then the pay-per-view numbers for Tank Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz, which is a fight important, but not nearly as important as Loma and Lomachenko and Lopez. The numbers were like less than 250,000. So I think we are, through our purchasing, setting the tone for what it needs to be. I just wish they'd get the point and start putting back midweek fights, because midweek fights are what will bring the sport back to the mainstream. Imagine if baseball and basketball were like football and you could only play once a week, and you only played for like 3 months out of the year. People can't follow fighters when they fight once or twice a year. And when everybody only fights on Saturday, you only have a finite number of cards. And that's why guys don't fight as often. I don't think you need a 20-year career. If you fight 6 times a year, wrap it up in 10. You still had 60 fights. You still took the same amount of damage. You just got it over with quickly and made more of your money. And then the fans can move on to being fans of new people. And you can have a wider pool to choose from. So, but the other changes as far as networks, I like how the fan reaction is driving on.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I think it's everything I relate to pro wrestling, right? Because that model that you stated, Vince did it first in the WWE network. You pay your $10 a
Yeah.
month, you get all of the past shit that you love, and then you get all of the pay-per-views. Now the pay-per-views haven't been as good. I think paying the $60 per pay-per-view, I think that added to a lot to the overall value of what we're seeing. But but even still, there's going to be some people that do it better. But I mean, shit, I don't think anybody that does it better in all of the things that you do and more consistently in all than you, my man. But obviously, to get to where you are in life, in your career, there has been a throng of supporters and people have given you a shot where you, I don't know, maybe you had to earn it a little bit more. So I definitely want to let you get some shout outs and acknowledgments out of the way. So the floor is yours, my man.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. And yeah, no, I mean, shout outs, like like I feel like I won an award, but yeah, no, without my parents didn't understand this, but they were always very supportive. So I hope to pay that forward to my kids. My current wife, very supportive of me when I needed to go out and do shows and things like that. And she's battled her own health issues and still takes great care of us and accepted 2 step kids into her world. Obviously love my children for their inspiration and getting along great. Like I said, blended family. I got an Irish ex-wife and a Mexican current wife. They're both American. I just mean ethnically. So I have a blonde, a redhead, a brown-haired, and a black-haired child because my stepson's half Filipino. But no, and obviously, thanks. We already gave to Steve Bash for giving me a shot there, and obviously, the cruise lines for employing me because I can't wait to get back to work there. But yes, you can check me out on YouTube. C Strait, Cstrait is my comedy, and Straight Talk, Strait Talk is my vlogging channel for more opinion stuff. I still try to make it funny. I got 4 CDs on all the Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora. If you download Dry Bar Comedy, that's a free app. I got a half-hour special on that as well. And I've actually written 2 books on boxing that are just article-based books. They're compilations of when I wrote for websites, but it's all the stuff that isn't timely, like my predictions. It's more like history of the game. So you can take a casual fan and turn them into an expert with my 2 books. They're all really cheap. All my books. I have a couple travel books, food books as well, psychology stuff, and they're all less than $3. Most are less than $1. They're just short ebooks that it's easy reading. If you put my name into Amazon author page, Chris Strait, then all those will pop up too.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You've set me down a wormhole, my man, that
I
I'm
know it's a
glad
lot.
I'm
Yeah.
going to go to. No, I love it. I absolutely love it. But also, the fact that you graced me with your presence on this very podcast, that's content creators and just creative types being able to support each other and kind of
Yeah. No,
speak their
entirely.
piece.
No.
Like it's amazing, and again, this is something that I wanted to happen back in 2003, like when they were kind of, you had to read the FCC regulations and you couldn't say this, do that, have this
Oh yeah.
person on, like whatever. And it's cool. Like you could just talk to your friends and have people kind of chime in and just have fun, and that's
Yeah.
it. So again, I thank you for it, and I'm definitely going to go ahead and check out every one of those projects that you have, man. And I think I'm going to enjoy myself going down this wormhole. But for those who
I
haven't, oh, go ahead.
But I say I appreciate that greatly, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this and getting the stuff out there and I obviously promoting the worlds and styles of entertainment that I care about so much.
Absolutely, man. We got to do that for each other, and especially, and a lot of times you were talking about like your parents not really realizing or understanding what their kid is into, but is supporting it nonetheless. I kind of had the same deal, and again, it's like the brother and sisterhood that is like combat sports. Like we all kind
Yeah.
of have converged together and become a community, in ourselves and in our kind of awkward, almost like idiot savant ways, but it works here. It definitely works here. So
Oh
there
yeah.
that is.
Yeah. No, entirely.
Now, for those who haven't already done so, to become a part of the community that is Chris Strait, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, on social media, it's just at I don't really do Twitter anymore, but on Facebook, I have a fan page and my regular. Just put in CRS Chris Strait Strait on my headshot. There is a bobblehead, so you'll find that easily. And on Instagram, Chris.Strait.904.
Absolutely. I followed him. You guys should too, man. I can't wait to go down this fantastic wormhole that is all content created by Chris Strait. I can't wait. And I encourage you all to do the same. But while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to the Straight Talk YouTube page. And you might even check out this very YouTube page and consider subscribing. And I hope you do. But just don't take my word for it. Chris, I mean, you're going to subscribe, right?
Of course.
Absolutely, but don't take our word for it. I mean, here's NXT notable Zeta Zhang.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe to According to